Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
The idea behind this class is not to get to know the meaning of liturgy necessarily any better, and it's not to delve into Hebrew grammar much better, anything like that. It's not even really that much a class about navigating the Siddur, although there are some pretty solid elements of this course that are about navigating the Siddur. It's really about how to do Siddur-based prayer leadership better. Right? It's how to lead more competently and or how to feel more connected to the leadership of a service from the pews, which also is an important element. So the idea here is to work on primarily nusah ha-tefillah. So last week we worked on a bunch of vocabulary about nusah ha-tefillah and about the Siddur. We reviewed some of these words that I think a lot of people are familiar with, but we wanted to get through some jargon. So one of the things that we talked about was this idea of amud. Does anyone remember what we talked about with amud? Who was here last week? The idea of amud is what? It's the place where it's related to Amidah. Yeah, the place where we stand, exactly. So it's the place where we stand, and a lot of people use it to refer to the table or the standing place where we stand, not to be confused with the stender, which is the Yiddish word for the thing that is standing, but a shulchan, the table, is the actual table. The amud is actually just the spot where somebody would be standing. In many Sephardic congregations and many contemporary congregations, that's the center, but also in many Ashkenazi congregations, it's just a frontal spot. And if we were going into the history of prayer, we talk about how people used to be down in front, not up in front, but now oftentimes we're just all on the same level because there's this whole democratization of prayer. We talked about amud as a word. We talked about siddur and tefillah, and we talked about davening and this idea, what could daven possibly mean? It's a pretty expansive word. So daven could mean what? It could mean praying at least two different things. You could come up with more definitions if you want. Davening is...
I use it like with sometimes the leader davening, like myself davening.
Right, it could. So I can daven from my seat, but also if somebody comes up and taps me on the shoulder and says, do you want to daven? Yeah. They probably don't just mean, do you want to engage with God in prayer? They probably mean, do you want to get up and lead and daven? So it's used expansively. In the same way that when someone says, do you want to come and share a piece of Torah? They probably don't literally mean something from the 5 books of Moses. They mean something expansively from the tradition. So a lot of words are used in a jargony kind of way. We want to make sure that we understand those basic terms. We also talked a little bit about the structure of prayer, and we talked about the concept of nusah. So first we're going to address a little, very, very quick review of the structure, and then we're going to talk about a quick review of the nusah, and we're going to jump right in back to the Siddur, going back to that first mode of nusah that we worked on last week. So pass these down here. These are the prayer skeleton, or also known as the prayer playbill for Shabbat morning. These sheets I've also emailed out to all the participants in the class. If you've registered recently, I will send out another email after this class, and this will be included in the email along with all the slides that are like clickable with all sorts of different things. One of the things I said at the very end of class and is also included in those slides is the encouragement that if you own the Siddur that is in front of you, you ought to feel very comfortable, I hope, writing in it, because in our history, we've really taken advantage of the notion of marginalia and the concept of a geniza and finding the notes of people from past generations. So in Judaism, we actually prize the notion of writing in our own Siddur for all sorts of reasons. So I encourage you to do that. And if you want to own a Siddur and don't yet own it, please tell me after class, email me. I will help you get your hands on a Siddur. So this prayer skeleton helps us to work through the structure of the day. You can use this in a whole lot of different ways. I have this for everything except for the High Holy Days. I have a kind of a skeleton going through any given service except for the High Holy Days. And the idea here is to look at the main segments of prayer and see where the transitional points are, see what requires a minyan and what doesn't, and also, for the sake of this class, see where we start a new piece of nusach and where not. So that's where we're going to focus today. Last week, we completely skipped over, because this class is about leading Shacharit, we skipped over the nusach of Birkot HaShachar, that's that third piece on the page, and Pesukei de Zimra, the verses of song. We skipped over those two sections because this is all about leading Shacharit l'Shabbat. This is all about leading the main part of Shacharit l'Shabbat. In another class, I'll teach the other stuff. But there is a specific nusach, there's a specific way, musical way of going about leading the prayers of Pesukei de Zimra, Birkot HaShachar, and Pesukei de Zimra for Shabbat and for festivals. That is different than what we do on weekdays and different than what we do on high holy days. So, Shacharit begins its nusach not where we say Shacharit structurally here, but rather begins its nusach with Nishmat Kol Chad. But why last week did we say that I still left this broken down in such a way that we have Shochein Ad on page 145 as the start of Shacharit for the sake of nusach? If we actually start singing the nusach of Shabbat Shaharit, the first set of nusach, we begin with Nishmat Kol Chai. So why did I start us on page 145 with Shochein Ad? What's the reason to start there with the nusach of Shacharit l'Shabbat?
Shacharit davener takes over.
That's exactly correct. That's when the shaliach or shlichat tzibor, the person responsible for leading the service, takes over. So even though the person who's leading Pesukei de Zimra starts that nusach a little bit early, we don't start until Shochein Ad. So it doesn't make sense to break it down any other way. Or maybe it does, but that's not how I did it. So, last week we began with my singing us through with some of this nusach, and we talked about how that helps us to understand the way it works with syntax. I'm going to do it a lot, and I don't feel silly at this point doing it whatsoever. We even tried it out with a little bit of live translation from the Siddur. I'm also going to point out that this is the simplest version of this set of nusach. There are lots of fancier versions, and we could go and get really fancy. But we're not doing that in this class because it's really important that we keep this to the simplest possible version. There is absolutely no way musically that I could keep it consistently to a set of notes as if it were in Spiro's bound books. I have that actually. I will gift you access, if you'd like it, to the pages on the Cantor's Assembly website that let you get a note by note, and then you can play a recording of someone singing note by note. Shochein ad maharom v'kadosh shemo. If you want that, I'll send it to you. Because some people, that's their best way of learning. That's fine. That's not how I'm able to teach it. In part, that's informed by the fact that my degree is in jazz music, so I only know how to improv. But also, it's informed by the fact that fluidity is native to the way that we do nusach, right? Nusach wasn't ever intended to be, it'd be like learning a Miles Davis solo and saying that's the only way to do that one piece, which is it's just not. That's not how music works. So we're going to go back to this nusach, and we're going to practice going from Shochein Ad all the way up through the end of the page before Eladon. Now I'm going to remind you the definition of nusach has something to do with music, but it has different elements. It begins with mode, which means different notes that are in a scale. Okay? So it's the notes that are in the scale that we're using. And it also means the patterns of notes, which we call a motif. So mode plus motif is how we get nusach. That's how we get to nusach. And yes, because I have a jazz background, that is why I enjoy doing things like using the nusach to sing it out. But it also helps to ingrain it as something that you can use in your head, and it helps drill in the idea that you can apply this nusach in lots of different ways. throughout the Siddur, and that if I do Shochein Ad Maharom V'Kadosh Shemo, and you do Shochein Ad Maharom V'Kadosh Shemo, and he does Shochein Ad Maharom V'Kadosh Shemo, all of those are kosher. They're not treif, but they're all a little bit different, and they give a little bit different flavor to the davening. Okay, so that's part of what makes it a little bit different flavor. So, nusach is mode plus motif. It's the notes that are kosher within a scale, and the motifs, the patterns of notes. Another way of thinking about it is thinking about it like Lego blocks. Okay, I didn't get into this last week, but I'm going to say this, and then we're going to go right into the Siddur. Lego blocks. The reason I like this, for two reasons. One reason I've always known, and two, I've learned recently because my child is really into Legos. So, one reason is that there are different shapes of Legos, like a certain number of dots by another certain number of dots. By the way, the plural of Lego is Lego, but I just can't do it. But there's different types of blocks. And so like a 3x2 piece, right? And the most important thing is that they're like these different identifiable pieces, right? So they go and you're like, oh, I put a this piece here and I put a that piece here. So I like it because that's kind of like trope in a certain way, right? Where you put this motif here and you put that motif there. But the reason that I started to really like this as an analogy, as a metaphor, is that also if you're really doing Lego the way that Lego wants you to do Lego, there's an order. And you gotta go in order. And you can't like reverse the order. So we don't start with Shochein Ad Maharom V'Kadosh Shemo. We don't do that. We don't go backwards with the order of Lego, right? It just feels weird to our ears and brains because there's an order that they go in. But you can insert other stuff along the way. Like there's a little bit of flexibility if you gotta put like you're in the middle of building, we just recently did like Women of NASA, great set of Lego, highly recommend it, got it for Ella's birthday. And as we were building up the space shuttle, there are like 4 1x1 little tiles, and it doesn't say put this tile first and this tile first. There's a little flexibility within what you're doing, but you don't get to like build the little characters first and then do the tiles. So there is an order to it, and then there's flexibility within the order. Another way of thinking about another analogy, if you are not a Lego person and that's just not what you can picture, is also like a recipe. Okay, it's very similar to a recipe. There's certain flexibility and you can put other flavors in it, but at a certain point if you change entirely what you're doing, you can no longer say, well, this is a gluten-free recipe version of it. No, it's just a totally different recipe. And also, there are certain things you can do out of order, but a lot of it you can't do out of order because you need to first mix the dry and then the wet and all that. So there's recipes too. And my challah tastes different than your challah. But we would both recognize each other's challah as challah. Okay? So there's a lot there too. If that analogy works for you, great. I'm big on analogies. So we're going to open the Siddur and begin working out of it for this first part. I'm going to have you do a little more repeat after me. And if we get bold and brave this week and may start going around and having people do a little bbit of individual repeating, for now, I'm going to have you do group repeating. We're on 147. If you want to be in that Siddur instead, we're on 65, I think. No, 65 is Psuki de Zimra. It's like 103 or something. Is that right?
Very close.
Yeah, 105.
Yeah,
it's very close.
Yeah, pretty good.
Darn close.
Yeah.
It's taking up spaces in my brain where I need to remember other very important things. Okay. The 147. So you're going to repeat after me, and then we're going to revisit some of the concepts from last week too, like Ashkenazim play this game where we say some, and then we mumble, and we mumble, and we mumble. Mm-hmm. We say it a lot, and then we say some, and then we mumble, and we mumble, and mumble. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. Yes, Aiden. Yes.
Where does the stop?
The previous leader stops at the end of the paragraph at the top of page 147 with Hamelecha Yoshev Al Kisei Ram Venisa. They leave the bima. The new person comes up to the bima and begins.
Non-Shabbos festival.
Then they would stop at the end of the previous page if it were a festival. and not Shabbat, they would end with the Chol Karavai Het Shem Kodsho, and the festival nusah will begin. And if people are interested, what I'll probably do this year, I've been meaning to be a little more mindful about it. I'll probably teach the festival Shaharit class sometime around February so that we're prepared for Pesach. I will try to do that because we've got plenty of need for Shaharit davenners at Pesach. Okay, so we stop at Hamelech HaYoshev Al Kisei Ram Venisa Yeshar Koach to whoever led. Okay, and now we're at Shochenad. You're going to repeat after me. Shochenad Marom V'Kadosh Shemo.
Shochenad Marom V'Kadosh Shemo.
We're going to whisper the next line to ourselves, so you're not going to repeat after me. If you want to do it at a pace that makes sense and you can't read Hebrew that fast, you can read to yourself in the English, which is as it is written, as the psalmist is written, sing, O you righteous to Adonai, praise offered by the upright is lovely. So if you feel like you're not a really fluent Hebrew davener, you can just read that in the English, and that's just exactly enough, right time, okay? Also kosher. And now you're going to repeat after me in that set apart paragraph, which is set apart like that because the editors they're tickling their own fancy with the with the fact that it's a little poem. Okay, so repeat after me. Befi yisharim titala.
Befi yisharim titala.
Uvdivrei tzadikim titbarach.
Divrei tzadikim titbarach.
Uvilshon chasidim titromam.
Uvilshon chasidim titromam.
Uvkerev kadoshim.
Uvkerev kadoshim.
Uvkerev kadoshim. Uvkerev kadoshim. Titkadash.
Titkadash.
So you've got this first motif, and then you go back to motif number 2. You go back to motif number 1, and then back to motif number 2. And then you go to this thing that's kind of like a penultimate motif. And when you have extra words, you can do this extra. It's something, something, something. And then back to motif number 2. Okay, that ending is motif number D. If you're very simple musically, you could stick to these 2 the whole time and never differentiate. Befi yisharim titala, divrei tzadikim titbarach, uvilshon chasidim titromam, uvkerev kedoshim titkadash, shekein chovat klitzarim lefanech Adonai Eloheinu. It gets kind of boring if you do it that way, but also you probably won't make a mistake. So if you want to stick with that, I don't blame you at all. But I want to kind of teach you how to differentiate a little bit more. And also something that you're doing when you do this motif is you're telling people that we're about to go to the next part. And as we turn the page, we all get excited. And you see how this works, okay? Now, another thing I'll remind you of is that when we do yadadai dadadai dadadai dadai dadai or yadadai dadadai 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 dadadai, you can expect that the next start of the next paragraph, people are probably going to join in with you. At least that is true. Some are like Beth, okay? So now let's go back to Befi. No, let's go to Uvmakalot, right? So Ukerev Kedoshim Titkadash. Now repeat after me. Uvmakalot Rivevot Amecha Beit Yisrael. Uvmakalot Rivevot Amecha Beit Yisrael. Make sure you don't accidentally rhyme Revivot with uvmakalot. Uvmakalot, revivot. Let's try it again. Uvmakalot, revivot. Amecha Beit Yisrael. We whisper to ourselves, you're going to repeat after me for this next part. I'm going to keep stopping myself and saying repeat after me so that you know when I'm going back into the repeat after me. Shekein chovat kol hayitzorim lefanecha. Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avoteinu. There are lots of ways to do this next part, but here's how I like to do it. Lehodot lehalel. Try that. Lehodot lehalel. Lishabeach lefaher. Lishabeach lefaher. Liromem lehader. Liromem lehader. Livarech lealei ulkaleis. Livarech le'alehu kaleis. Try it with me. Livarech le'alehu kaleis. Let your eyes go back up one line to lehodot and listen to me once. Lehodot lehalel, lishabeach lefaher, liromem lehader, livarech le'alehu kaleis. It's because the whole paragraph is to praise out loud, to offer praise, another word for praise, to offer beauty, to lift up, to give beauty, to bless and to lift up, and to another word to give praise, okay? It's a litany of the same words, right? And so it's not just that I'm like, oh, that's a lot of words I gotta get through to do it. It's actually artful because there's something about that whole list of words. So I like to do them in pairs because they're written in pairs. Lehodot, lehalel, leshabeach, lefa'er, leramem, lehader, levarech, le'alei, ulkales. Al kol divrei shirot v'tishbachot. Notice it's v'tish bechot, not v'tish bachot. There are a lot of places where it's v'tish bechot and a few words v'tish bachot. Okay? So let's try, repeat after me. Let me do it first. Al kol divrei shirot v'tishbechot. Al kol divrei shirot v'tishbechot. David ben Yishai. Try that.
David ben Yishai.
Avdecha meshichecha. You're doing great. And then there would maybe be a really annoyingly disruptive announcement. Please rise. But I like it when we don't have to announce that because it doesn't disrupt the cool momentum. Yishtabach. We can all do it together. Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu. As I mentioned last time, there are some ways of singing through the whole paragraph. Ha'elam melech hagadol ve'hakadosh b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. By the way, that is a Hanukkah song.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people do it, but then it moves into Yilech Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avoteinu Shiru Shvachah Le'al Hazimra. You know what, though? That takes time. And if not everybody knows it, in the congregation, I don't find it so exciting. So I don't usually do it. We're going to pick up at Barachot. Again, in this class, for the most part, I'm going to teach you nusah more so than congregational melodies. A few places I will. But I really want you to learn how, if you knew no melodies or you went to a place where they didn't know any melodies, how would you get through it, okay? Or also, how will you recognize the nusach and what's happening in it if you're not up there leading? So here we go. We're going to pick up at Barachot. We're going to whisper, whisper, whisper. Again, you could go into the English if you felt you didn't know the pacing. And repeat after me. I'm going to start at Brachot. Berachot ve'hodahot me'ata ve'ad olam. You try it. Berachot ve'hodahot me'ata ve'ad olam. Two options here. Either do Baruch atah Adonai. Try that with me. Baruch atah Adonai. Or I might do something really, this is just for those of you who are like, it's really boring to just go back to the same motif. You could do Baruch atah Adonai. Baruch atah Adonai. That's like if you're bored of the other stuff, but you could just go back to Baruch atah Adonai. You could just like go back to the beginning again. I'm going to pick up at El Melech Gadol. I'll do it and then have you repeat after me. El Melech Gadol Batishbachot. You try it.
El Melech Gadol Batishbachot.
Good job with that under Tishbachot. El HaHodahot Adon HaNiflaot.
El HaHodahot Adon HaNiflaot.
Get ready for this next one. Habocher Beshirei Zimra.
Habocher
Good, and I'm going to separate these words so that their meaning remains correct. Melech-el. Try that. Melech-el. Chei ha'olamim. Or Chei ha'olamim. If those two didn't sound different to you, then don't worry about it at all. But if they did, then you know that it's okay to be a little bit different between the two. Okay, we're going to do Chatzi Kaddish, which is exceedingly easy once you've been doing this for so long. So we're going to do, I promise it's going to be so, you're going to feel it's easier because we've been doing it. So repeat after me. Actually, you know what? I take it back. Do it with me. We're going to try it together. You ready? Let's do it. Yitgadal ve'yitgadash shenei rabbah be'alma divrah hirutei ve'amlich malchutei. You're following great. B'chayechom u'vyomechom. We're going to do a big chunk. U'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. Penultimate. Bagalau bizman pariv. Straight to the end. Ve'imru amen. Back to the beginning. Yehi shemei rabba mevarach. Le'alam u'lam me'omaya. And then again at the beginning with Yitbarach beginning, meaning a musical pattern. Yitbarach le'yishabach. V'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei. V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal. We need to do those three words together in order to get to the barichu as a response. So let's try it again from v'yitadar, which is the second line under leader in that last paragraph. Okay. V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shemei d'kudesha barichu. I want to be really clear here. If you're leading, you do say barichu, okay? We all say all the words of Kaddish. Some people have a custom of saying barichu as the leader after the congregation, which is fine too. You can actually accomplish that the same. So I want you guys to do, you guys just be the congregation for a second. I'm going to do the second paragraph just as leader, and you guys be my barichu, okay? So I'm soloing. You ready? Yibarach v'yishabach v'yitbar v'yitromam v'yitnasei v'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei d'kudesha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata. Just echo it. It's fine. It's not a big deal, right? I just echo it a little bit after. For some people, I actually don't. I'm sure there's some very interesting reason behind it. You can ask Rabbi Avi Havivi or somebody else who really cares deeply and is knowledgeable about liturgy what the reason is, but some people like to delay it and respond after. Okay, we're going to go back to le'ela min kol. That stuff in the brackets is only 1 week a year. Okay, one Shabbat a year. This is a Shabbat and Festival Siddur. One Shabbat a year. Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we do the stuff in the brackets, otherwise ignore it. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Try that. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushvechata v'nechamata tushvechata v'nechamata. I can't just end it because I got 4 words to go. I can't just do Damiran. I can't end it, so I have to do Damiran b'yama Ve'imru amein. I need that extra little bit. It's like an extension, okay? So try with me, Damiran. Damiran b'yama Ve'imru amein. In an advanced class, which I do sometimes teach. I'm not teaching it right now, but there are a couple things that I address. So if you're like, I get all this. And I have all these advanced questions about why is it that some people say Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar, and you're saying Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar. That's for an advanced class. There is a differential. You can email me about it, or you can come to an advanced class and we'll talk about the differential. Yes, there's a difference, but don't worry about it for right now. Don't stress on it. There was one other thing I was going to bring up. Oh, that some people do v'imru amen. So some people, Ve'imru means and it's said or and we say. So some people grew up saying Ve'imru amen, amen, which is actually pretty accurate, but turns out to be just pretty confusing for a lot of people. So I don't do it. But some people do that. If you have questions about like those pronunciation-ish things, oh, that was the other thing I was going to say. This prayer is in Aramaic. Everything else we've done so far, Hebrew. Aramaic, ancient Near Eastern language that was the vernacular, was the common language on the streets. It wasn't the holy tongue. It's like, if Hebrew were the Latin, this was whatever other language people were speaking. And some people pronounce it using some of the rules around Hebrew, and some people don't. If you want to talk to me about that, again, that's like an email question. Like, do I say damiron or damiron? Do I say, where do I do the vowelization? If you want to be particular about it, email me and I'll let you know. Yeah, of course. Go for it.
Question?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, there's one Kaddish where it's kirute and another where it's chirute.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah,
and it has to do with the number of syllables because the dagesh itself counts for a syllable, and it has to do with the syllable count that we use. It's a very complicated thing. What I suggest for now in terms of like this being a course on the usability of the Siddur, I always suggest when you see stuff like, turn to the next page and I'll give you an analogous example. Do you see the Hamavorach has no dagesh in it? There's like there's a machloket, there's an argument about whether that it's you call a shva merachafet. It's like there's a whole like debate about it. What I do is I follow the norm of the editors of the Siddur, so all we're doing the same thing. So if it says kirute, we do kirute. And if it says, there's no dagesh in the mem, I will pronounce it as hamvorach and not hamevorach as best as possible because I follow the norms of whatever the editors have done. There are some interesting, like very picky grammatical debates. For the sake of a class on like, how do I use the Siddur?
Just read what it says.
Read what's in there because that keeps us all together. I feel that way about lots of things. Like V'yishay Yisrael. I have a personal practice to use V'yishay Yisrael. I actually do. I have a personal practice. I pray, I insert the fires of Israel into every one of my Amidas in the Ritzei paragraph because I think it's a beautiful piece of our Korban history, our history of having offered up sacrifices once upon a time. And anyway, the paragraph in all of our Siddurim in past tense. So I insert it, but it's not there in the Siddur. It's there in the Machzor in brackets, but it's not in the Siddur. So I do not insert it when I'm doing it publicly out loud because I find that sows confusion. So yeah, so I hope that's a useful answer for now, but there is a much wonkier answer to be offered.
And you go by the Siddur, and if you're familiar, you wouldn't go by how you know that they pronounce it. You would instead go.
That's a great question. If there's a differentiation between the two, like if everybody has always said Baruch Hu et Hashem Hamevorach, and that's always and forever for all time the way that everybody in the community has pronounced it, I don't think there's anything wrong with pronouncing that. But if you yourself were like, oof, but it's Shavam or a Chafan, I just don't know, then go with the Siddur if you're torn. Like I would just go with the Siddur. Yeah.
Is that what you were referring to when you spoke about a congregational melody? Or what exactly is that in contrast to the approach you're taking?
So a congregational melody is just an entirely different notion. So a congregational melody is going to be, instead of using a series of motifs like da 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 and applying that to the words on the page, it means that there's a through composed melody like da 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 da, and applying that. And typically, first of all, one thing that defines it is that it's like through composed to apply to the words, right? So it's gonna either it's parody, so it's from some other melody, like we're applying Kiva Moed, a tune from one prayer to another prayer. Sometimes that happens, or it was really composed for that very prayer, right? And so we're singing it along to there. So one thing that defines is that it's through composed for that purpose. And the other thing that defines it is that it's inviting the congregation to sing along. So, for example, if you page ahead to 154, in just a few minutes, we're going to get to the nusah of this page. The nusah, by the way, this is a nice little preview, is named Ahava Rabbah. It's the name of the nusah. Okay? The name of the nusach for this part of the Siddur is Ahava Rabbah. And the nusach, the mode and motif is Ahava Rabbah Tanu Adonai Eloheinu Chemla Gedola V'Terachamav Aleinu. The congregational melody is Ahava Rabbah Tanu. It has meter, it could be conducted, everybody's invited to sing along. That's a congregational melody. Nusach is Ahava Rabbah Tanu Adonai Eloheinu V'Keratan L'Shucha Gadol Sela Be'emet versus V'Keratanu, because that's Hatifa.
But he still fit with the mode inside.
Great question. It would be great if it did. It rarely does. Which is one of the reasons I don't love congregational melodies. Not because it bothers me principally. Like, it's not on principle that it bothers me. It's that it's hard to get back to the nusah. It's really hard. If you've gone so far afield, it's just really hard to get back to it. For me. Maybe other people are just more talented, but I find it very frustrating. So, we've gotten as far as the end of Chatikat, of the bottom of 148 at Damiram Beham Avimru Amein. Okay, so repeat after me, even though it's confusing because Baruch Hu is usually responsive, but I want you to practice both parts. Actually, I'll be the leader and you be the congregation, then we'll trade off, okay? So I'll be the leader, you be the congregation. We're on 149. Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamborach. Baruch Adonai Hamborach. And then my response as a leader is Baruch Adonai Hamborach. Le'olam va'ed. I want to do this now, and I'm going to play both roles, but I'm going to do it in English. So you can hear why it's so cool to use the nusach in that way. So, praised is God to whom all praise is directed. Oh yes, praise God. Sorry, I messed that up. Oh yes, praise God to whom all praise is directed forever and ever. That's right. Praise God to whom all praise is directed forever and ever. So it's emphatic in its own way, right? Using the nusach in that way creates a totally different kind of musical conversation than if if the leader were to do Baruch Adonai Havarach Le'olam Va'ed. No, let's keep it as a musical conversation. So it's going to be Baruch Hu et Adoshem Hamiborach. Baruch Adoshem Haborach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adoshem Haborach Le'olam Va'ed. Okay, now you guys are the leaders and I'm the congregation. You ready? Chad, Shtayim, Shalosh.
Baruch et Adonai Haborach.
Baruch Adonai Haborach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Haborach Le'olam Va'ed.
Fabulous. Great. Then, yes, question? Yes.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions on choreography.
Go for it.
And I grew up Reform.
Okay.
And so the choreography is different / not necessarily accurate in some ways. And I've seen people do it very. I was taught by a very stickler teacher, and so he's very specific that you have to not be bending. But I see prayer leaders. I just see some prayer leaders still bending when we say Adonai. And I just want to know if there is an obligation for us leader to really not do that, or if it's actually not such a big deal.
Rabbi Rambam would agree.
Yeah, there are some people. So Rabbi Rambam, who's our Rabbi Emeritus here, and also a great halachist, he would totally agree with that. And he would even go so far, I hope I'm not misquoting him, but he would even say that when we get to Gadlu Ladoshem Iti, when we're holding the Torah in the Torah service, and we get to Gadlu Ladonai Iti, when Eromim Hashem Bo Yachtav, if you're holding the Torah, that you shouldn't bow at all, because then you're literally causing the Torah to bow. There's a whole debate about whether you should even, forget about bowing on the word God. So I would say there are degrees of people who care about it more or less. As far as I know, it's closer to the scale of minhag than it is to halacha. But if you wanted to be particularly accurate about it, the first thing I would say is Baruch Hu is related to Birkayim, and there's a reason for that. So it's definitely intended to be a knee-related bow as opposed to a half-body bow, which is the Modim bow. Okay, so Baruch Hu et Adonai is the most ideal way. That being said, in 2022, I think we all think about how our bodies work very differently. So it doesn't work for me to be like a particular stickler about how people do that. I would just say like bow as much as you can. And also to go to the other side, forget about like ableism for a moment and just think about the way that people engage with prayer. Like bow deeply if possible. So Baruch Hu Tzadu Shem HaMevorach. And the best advice that I can give you is if you extend the words and slow it down a bit as a prayer leader, it allows people to make those choices. Right? Because if you do Baruch Hu Tzadu Shem HaMevorach, the whole congregation is now at that pace. Baruch Tzadu Shem HaMevorach. And remember, you got an extra syllable in there. They didn't. Baruch Tzadu Shem, they're folding over. So yeah, the slower you go, the more as a prayer leader, you're giving them an opportunity to catch up. Right? And if I haven't mentioned it yet, in general as a prayer leader or a chanter, it's so wise to stick to slowest common denominator. If there's a word that you don't pronounce as quickly as the rest in that line, go as slow as you need to go for that whole line. As slowly as you need to go for the whole line. Let's move into the next nusah. Okay, quickly, 2 comments, and then we're going to move into the next nusah. Yeah.
I've never heard Rambam teach not to bow at the Torah.
I got to ask him. Now, because I thought that was his teaching, but could easily be someone else.
It wasn't in the room at the time.
I got to ask him.
I have had Avi come and transfer the Torah to my right shoulder, which I think is minhag. Maybe he's got a reason what he didn't know. Gotten up at 5 a.m. that morning to ice that shoulder, but what the heck? That he was very
Medactic about it. Yeah, very careful.
Dati about it.
Yeah. Did you have a thought also?
Yeah. So, and this you need more, and
Yep.
if you don't have a minion, I know some people at the end.
Yes. So Baruch Hu, we need a minion for. It's the first thing that we need a minion for after, when you get the prayer skeleton in the email, you'll see that the last thing that you needed a minion for was technically was the Chatzi Kaddish, but you could have skipped the Chatzi Kaddish and been doing Shacharit kind of like Kiyachid, as if you're all individuals going to that. The thing previous to that were the other Kaddishes, way back in Birkot HaShachar. So Baruch Hu is the next thing that you need a minion for. And yes, some people will simply say Baruch Hu at the end. There's also something at the Shema that's relevant to this. So we'll get there. But yes, the Baruch Hu also you do need a minion for. We typically do not do the full blessing at the top of page 150, which is such an interesting blessing. We're not going to get into the interesting nature of that blessing. We're just going to say that blessing itself, we do not recite fully out loud. We usually recite to ourselves, not inducing or inviting an amen. So typically we do Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Haolam Yitzeror V'Berei Choshech V'Sei Shalom U'Riyeh Hakol, and you might out loud do Hakol Yohuducha V'Hakol Yishabechucha. Those are the first 4 words of that long paragraph on 150. So let's try that together. Hakol Yohuducha V'Hakol Yishabechucha, and then we daven until. Please ignore the arrow there. I totally disagree with the editors. In fact, I am convinced it's a mistake. I never asked Ed Feld, but I think it's the second Ein Ke'erkacha he was aiming for there. So we're going to start there. So repeat after me with that second. Go down 2 more lines below that Ein Ke'erkacha to the next Ein Ke'erkacha and repeat after me. Ein Ke'erkacha Adonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh. You try it. Ein Ke'erkacha Adonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh ve'ein zulatecha malkeinu l'chayei ha'olam haba ve'ein zulatecha malkeinu l'chayei ha'olam haba. Efes piltecha go aleinu. That's a reciting tone when you stay on that note for a long time. Efes piltecha go aleinu. Try it with me, just the same notes. Efes piltecha go aleinu. I'm going to continue and then you'll repeat after me. Limot HaMashiach. Limot HaMashiach. Ve'ein domeh lecha Moshienu. Try that with me. Ve'ein domeh lecha. Hang on, let's try it again. We're not going to move to until cha. Ve'ein domeh lecha. Okay, we're not going to move to the second note of cha. Ve'ein domeh lecha Moshienu. Litchiyat hametim. Litchiyat hametim. Much to people's chagrin, possibly. I'm not going to teach you Eladon. I'm not interested in it. It's not nusah. I mean, what I am interested in is coming back to it later. So a couple of things about it. First of all, Eladon is a piyut. If you want to learn about piyut, you should take a class on piyut. It's a type of reshut prayer. It's in the realm of totally optional. One of the things I like to teach about this, though, as long as I'm here, is should you find yourself stuck at home on a Shabbat morning and davening privately, davening as in you're praying to God, you have absolutely no obligation to say this. It's a beautiful poem, but it is definitely skippable, right? You do not need to say this because it's an addition, it's a poem. Listen, all piyut and all reshut got stuck in because somebody was like, I have this great poem I love saying on Shabbat, and at least someone else was like, that's a great poem. I think other people should see that too, to see in the, and eventually it got published in a siddur, and eventually it got included, and whatever, the little hakdama, the little introduction that said, this is, so-and-so's, I guess in this case, let's see, do we know? We don't even know. I mean, Ed didn't even include, Rabbi Ed Feld didn't even include in here who it was, but somebody wrote this lovely alphabetical acrostic poem and included it in the siddur. We're going to skip over it. Here's what I want to tell you about it, though, before you skip the page. Bottom of 151. Whatever tune you're using, personally, rather than in going into at the end of it, unless people are happy clappy, I don't want to stop anyone's enjoying that, I like to go into the nusach there. So hold that thought. We're going to come back to it next week. This is where I like to move into the nusach for the next portion. Okay, so we ended, if you flip back to 150 at Ve'ein domeh lecha Moshienu Litchiyat hametim. Bye-bye. That's the end of it. That's the last place that is the kosher nusach for. No mas. Okay, that's it. Now, flip past Eladon to page 152. And we're going to work on the next section. I'm going to teach you a little bit about this mode and a little about the motifs, just like last time where I landed and taught you a little bit of this, nusach, and then this time we've gone much more deeply into it. I'm going to teach you a little bit of this nusach, and we're going to pause on it, and next week we'll come back to that nusach. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make understand that.
Of course.
So that mode ends, and then we start a new mode.
Brand new mode, brand new motifs. Brand new mode of motifs. And you know what? In this case, you know what I was saying to David, right? About congregational melodies and the notion of like how hard it is to get back into things. In this case, this is an example of how congregational melody works as a palate cleanser in our favor. Because whatever we do for Eladon, it takes us out of the takes us out of there. We're in some other zone, and then we can come back to land at the new nusach. So I actually find it helpful in that case because we're coming out of our old nusach mode, and then we're going to land back in the new nusach mode.
And sorry, why does it? What is the reasoning for where a new?
Great question. So there's a little more to it than I can get into it here, but I'm going to give you a little taste of why. It's really related to what section of the prayers it applies to. It's a combination of the definition of the prayer. So in this case, this nusach mode I'm about to get into, Ahava Rabbah, belongs to the blessings. It's called Shema Uvirchotecha, Shema and her blessings. And there is a very, very long-standing, admittedly Ashkenazi-centric tradition of transitioning at that point to this nusach in particular. So the rabbis decided that whole page that comes before Eladon, it really is just a hakdama. It's an introduction to Eladon as a piyut, And la'el asher Shabbat mikol hama'asim at the top of 152. That's where Shema u'virchotecha start, according to those who set the nusach tradition. Sometime probably goes back to at least the 18th century. It's at least traceable back to the 18th century. So we're going to just learn a taste of the beginning of this nusach, and then we'll wrap for this week. It goes like this. I'm going to sing a little bit of it, and then I'm going to break it down. La'el asher Shabbat mikol hama'asim. Now I'm going to pick up at the bottom of that top paragraph at the word titbarach, at that little caret. Titbarach Mosheinu al shevach ma'aseyadecha ve'al me'or shehasita yifaru chasela. That's one. That's two. That's three. That's four. That's the entire system. The entire system is the motifs are much mushier in Ahava Rabbah, generally speaking, and it sometimes does go below the tonic and above the tonic. And what I mean by that is instead of we sometimes get to it goes higher, it goes lower than 1 and higher than 8. So the scale, if you want to get into the mode, the scale, two mnemonic melodies. One is Fiddler on the Roof, and the other is Hava Nagila. Okay? So the fiddler theme. Yeta-tai-tai, 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 yeta-tai-tai-tai. That's in Freygish. Freygish is just the name that klezmer as a world uses to call Ahava Rabbah as a mode. Okay? It originated in the nusach land, and of course it went out to klezmer, to the players of musical instruments. And then there's also Hava Nagila. And there are other technical musical names for these modes, but the idea here is that instead of a minor that has 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're taking those notes and we're taking that 2 and we're bringing it lower. And we're taking that 3 and we're raising it, okay? And when we create that space, that jaws, that do, that tiny space, that little half step there, and then that leap to that giant space and a half, okay, that's a step and a half. So yeta dai, or Hava Nagila. Right? So it's that space between that 2 and that 3, that lowered 2 and that raised 3, that creates that cool tension in the mode. So we're going to get a lot of because they want to emphasize the little feeling of it. So it's going to be Tiparach Moshino al Shavach Maseyatecha Vilmefari or Shesita Yifaru Chasela 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to do that a lot because we want to feel that we're in that mode. So we're going to get that over and over again. And I want to show you one last thing before we end. Flip to 153. It's the longest page you have to slog through in this mode because there's no congregational melody to get through. And look in the smack in the middle of that page, that kadosh. Okay? The other place in our tradition where we get Ahava Rabbah is in the Kedusha. It shows in the Kedusha. This is called the Kedusha de Sidra. I'm not going to get into the history of it, but we get this miniature Kedusha here. And you guys are probably pretty familiar with the fact that Kadosh, 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 this piece from that this piece from our prophets gets lifted either in that Kedusha or this Kedusha de Sidra, and it's used in Ahava Rabbah. And so I bet you're familiar with the way that Ahava Rabbah goes in it, where it goes, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzibahot, Melokala. Very hard to do this. Melokala Haaretz. Haaretz Kivoto. That's that scale, okay? Melokala Haaretz Kivoto. So that's Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Meloch haaretz kivodo. Okay? So that Kadosh, 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 that's smack in the middle of that Ahava Rabbah. And that's what we're going to get into starting next week is this section. The Ahava Rabbah is going to take us from La'el Asher at the top of 152 all the way to Tzur Yisrael at the bottom of 158. But don't be too stressed about that being even like 6 whole pages of stuff, because of course the Shema, we're basically doing in a whisper. Certainly in our congregation, even if you're somewhere else, it's going to be in major anyway, in a familiar Vehafta. So we're really talking about 4 pages. We're going to come back to it though, in the repetition of the Amidah. We're going to come back to it. But right now, you don't need to worry about more than like 4 pages of that. We're going to get there. And we had 4 pages of the other one, you made it through. So we've got this. Any questions before we end? Yeah.
Why do you think it is that the nusah are not actually indicated on the page?
You know what? If I edited a Siddur, actually I did. I wrote a Siddur. I edited a Siddur as part of my master's project, and I also didn't put it in there. It's a really wonderful question why it's not there. I think there's something about it living on another plane. You know, it's like the musical tradition is just not, it's the same reason that, and I don't have an answer to it, but it goes to the same question as why Jews don't have hymnals, right? Why do we not have hymnals? Why do we not have in our pews books like many, 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 many church traditions going back to literally like pre-Middle Ages, where it just lists out like the music for this psalm and that psalm? Why do we not do that? I have no idea. I mean, I have no knowledge of any Jewish musical tradition that does that.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.